Okay, so are you ready for this? Today we're diving into something kind of spooky. Life, death, the whole shebang.
The big questions, right? And we're getting a unique perspective on it all.
Totally. We're talking about Rain Willerslev. He's an anthropologist, A&D, the director of Denmark's National Museum.
And he just wrote a book called Afterlife, A Conversation About the Uncertain, which is interesting in itself, but
But it's more than just talk, right? This guy's actually planning his afterlife wardrobe.
it's true. I mean, who thinks about that kind of thing?
Right. So there's this article from the Danish news site, Dagar. It talks about how Willerslev wants to be buried with all his hunting gear.
Yeah, his bow, warm clothes, even his gun and bullets, though he's not sure if they'll allow that last part.
Understandable. But still, can you imagine? What an interesting request.
It really makes you think he's not doing it for show. He genuinely believes he'll need these things in the next life.
Wow. So where does this belief come from?
Well, a lot of it stems from his work with indigenous cultures, particularly in Siberia.
Right. He spent years living with these communities, studying their beliefs and practices.
And many of them have this very matter-of-fact approach to the afterlife. It's not this abstract concept, it's an extension of this life.
So for Willerslev, packing his hunting gear isn't that different from, say, packing a suitcase for a trip.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that he doesn't see this as contradicting his scientific background. He even points out that for most of human history, belief in an afterlife was the norm, not the exception.
That's a good point. It's like somewhere along the way, modern Western society kind of decided, nope, no afterlife for us.
It's true, but it wasn't always that way. Think about ancient Egypt. They were burying people with all sorts of treasures for the afterlife.
Exactly. Or how about those elaborate tombs and pyramids? They weren't messing around.
It's like Willerslev says, death was seen as a transition, a journey to another realm.
Okay, so we get it. People have believed in an afterlife for a long time. But why should we care what one Danish anthropologist thinks?
Because it challenges us to examine our own deeply ingrained assumptions about life and death. It makes us ask, what if we haven't even scratched the surface of what consciousness is, or what happens after we die?
It's like he's saying, hey, maybe our current understanding is just one tiny piece of a much larger puzzle.
Exactly. And what if, as Willerslev suggests, breakthroughs in neuroscience could someday provide more concrete answers?
Oh, right. He talks about how future scientific discoveries, especially about consciousness, could totally change how we view life and death.
Imagine that. What if we could scientifically prove what happens to our consciousness after we die?
Mind-blowing, right? It's like something out of a science fiction novel.
It is. And Willerslev even suggests that consciousness might not be limited to our brains. What if it's a collective phenomenon, something that exists in nature, and our brains just tap into it?
Wait, so you're saying instead of our consciousness dying with our bodies, it could actually be part of something much bigger?
That's the idea, yeah.
Wow. Okay, I need a minute to process this. So we've got this anthropologist planning his afterlife wardrobe, ancient Egyptians building elaborate tombs, and now the possibility that consciousness could be like this cosmic Wi-Fi signal.
It's a lot to take in, right? But that's what makes Willerslev's perspective so fascinating.
He's not afraid to blur the lines between science and spirituality, and he's not afraid to ask the big questions, even if we don't have all the answers. Yet, it's wild to think about,
Yeah.
Like, on one hand, we're talking about these huge concepts, life, death, consciousness. It's easy to get lost in the thought of it all.
Right, it can feel very abstract.
But then you've got Willerslev over here packing his hunting gear for the afterlife. Totally matter of fact about it.
He's very practical, that's for sure.
It suddenly makes it all feel very real and relatable.
Definitely. And it reminds us that for most of human history, this wasn't some big philosophical debate, It was just a part of life woven into everyday experience.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about fear of the unknown either. Like, remember how we were talking about the Egyptians burying their dead with all their riches?
Oh, yeah.
Willis talks about how for many cultures, the afterlife wasn't seen as a place of punishment, It was more about continuations.
It's like a new adventure. He actually talks about this idea of perpetual wandering that some Siberian cultures believe in.
Perpetual wandering.
Yeah, instead of an ending, death is just the next chapter in this ongoing journey.
So you just keep on going. And you take those experiences with you, those skills, maybe even those trusty boots. It makes you think differently about the things we value in this life.
It does. Like, do those values carry over? It's an interesting question.
It really is. I mean, have we been thinking about this whole life and death thing all wrong? What if, instead of fearing death, we thought about it as a transition?
continuation, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. Continuation of consciousness, but in a different way.
And that's what makes this whole scientific angle so exciting. If consciousness is this field that we tap into, like some scientists believe.
Not just something that our brains generate.
Exactly. It opens up some seriously mind-blowing possibilities about what happens after we die.
Okay, hold on. I need a minute to process this. Are we really talking about a potential paradigm shift in how we see life and death?
We might be. It could change everything, even the universe itself. Willerslev even compares it to Darwin's theory of evolution.
It's huge.
Right. It completely changed how we understood life on Earth. He thinks we could be on the verge of a similar revolution, but this time it's about consciousness.
So instead of death being like a full stop at the end of our story,
It's more like a comma.
yes, a pause before the next chapter begins.
And just like any good story, we can approach that next chapter with a sense of wonder, rather than being scared.
I like that. Not knowing what comes next, but being open to whatever it could be.
Exactly. It's that openness, that willingness to question everything we think we know. That's what makes Willerslev's perspective so refreshing.
That's a good point. He's not claiming to have all the answers, right? He's inviting us to consider a different way of looking at things, one that blends science and a sense of wonder.
Exactly. A more nuanced perspective, which is something we could all use a little more of these days.
100%. It reminds us that the biggest questions, the most important questions, well, we don't necessarily have definitive answers for them.
And maybe that's okay.
Maybe that's part of what makes it all so fascinating. When we first started talking about this, I thought we'd be looking at like old burial rituals and stuff, maybe some philosophy about the afterlife.
It's definitely gone in a different direction.
Right, this whole idea of consciousness being this collective thing, something bigger than just us.
A force out there in the universe?
Yeah, it's definitely changed how I see things.
It makes you think, doesn't it? And it really speaks to Willerslev's main point. We can't limit ourselves to only what we think we know right now.
What's impossible today could be a scientific breakthrough tomorrow.
Exactly. I think about that saying, the universe isn't just stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine.
Yeah. Maybe that's what's so amazing, embracing the mystery of it all.
It's a good point. That sense of wonder, that desire to understand what we don't, it's part of what makes us human.
Okay, so how do we actually use all of this? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not about to pack my bags for the afterlife,
Right. It's not about literally packing your bags. It's about how this changes how we live now.
So what are we supposed to do with this information?
Well, think about it this way. If death isn't really the end, if some part of us might go on, doesn't that change how we think about our lives?
It makes you think about legacy differently. Not just what we leave behind, like our stuff,
Yeah.
but our impact on other people.
Yeah, the things we share, the connections we make, the love we give, maybe that's what carries on in a way.
Maybe that's how we live on. It's a nice thought.
It is. And just being open to that possibility, it could make the journey a little brighter, a little less scary.
I like that. Okay, well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the mind of Randy Willerslev. But just because the episode's over doesn't mean the conversation has to end right.
Of course not.
So, what do you think? About all of this life, death, the mysteries, everything in between, head over to our social media and tell us your thoughts. Until next time, keep on exploring those big questions out there.